The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune, casting long, eerie shadows in the empty hallways of Marshall and Reed. It was 11:45 p.m., and the only sound was the gentle squeak of Miguel Ramirez's cleaning cart as he made his rounds. 20 years of cleaning corporate offices had taught Miguel a valuable lesson: blend in. Tonight, that skill would prove more vital than anyone could imagine. He pushed his cart past the gleaming glass walls, his weathered hands gripping the worn handle, his gaze seemingly unfocused. He was a ghost in this world of power and privilege, a silent observer of their late-night machinations. As he approached the document room, something snagged his attention. The keycard reader's light blinked a steady green, not the reassuring red that signified the door was locked. Miguel slowed his pace, his gut churning with a familiar unease born from years of careful observation. Through the glass panel, he saw movement inside. Unusual movement. At this hour, he pretended to check the wheels of his cat, taking his time, his eyes glued to the shadows. Senior partner James Harrison, a man whose suits cost more than Miguel's annual salary, was there. And beside him, managing partner Sarah Chin, her normally impeccable appearance somehow disheveled. They were stuffing papers into a sleek leather briefcase, the kind that screamed expensive and important. Miguel's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't dare show any emotion, a lesson he'd learned long ago. The best way to gather information was to appear uninterested. So he continued his work, wiping down surfaces, polishing the already spotless floors, all the while cataloging the scene in his mind. Asterisk Harrison and Chin. The document room. Late night. Papers into a briefcase. Asterisk. It was only 3 months ago that he'd been hired. The paperwork, the interviews, the background checks, all clean. Just a simple cleaning job. What the lawyers didn't know, what no one knew, was that every detail, every late-night meeting, every whispered conversation, was being carefully catalogued in his mind. He was a silent witness, a ghost in their gilded cage. The next morning, chaos erupted. It slammed into the pristine 47th floor of Marshall and Reed like a physical force, shattering the veneer of calm that usually reigned. Associates scrambled between offices, partners barked orders, and the air crackled with a panicked energy. The cause? The complete disappearance of the Bennett case files. The Bennett case was the firm's biggest, a billion-dollar corporate lawsuit that had captivated the nation. The files, the very heart of their case, were gone. This is impossible. James Harrison's voice boomed from the conference room, his perfectly tailored suit somehow failing to conceal the slight tremor in his hands. Those files were secured in the document room. Who had access last night? Sarah Chin, her usually immaculate appearance showing the strain, pulled up the security logs on her tablet. Her perfectly manicured fingers swiped across the screen, and her eyes narrowed as she scanned the data. According to the system, only the cleaning staff had access after 10 p.m. Her gaze flicked towards the security footage. Wait, look at this. The screen displayed a grainy video of the document room entrance. Miguel, entering at 11:47 p.m. The timestamp matched his usual cleaning schedule, but something felt off. The video quality was subtly degraded, just enough to blur the finer details. That's it. Harrison slammed his hand on the conference table, making the junior associates jump. The janitor. He must have been paid off by Bennett's team. It's the only explanation. A dark smile played on Harrison's lips. He liked the smell of blood. What happened next was a masterclass in manipulation, a swift and precise takedown. Harrison and Chin, with their years of legal expertise, turned their skills against their target. They edited the security footage, removing the segments that showed their presence in the document room. They crafted a narrative so plausible, so convincing, that even their own junior associates believed it without question. By afternoon, the police were involved. Detective Sandra Martinez, a woman with 20 years on the force, listened carefully as Harrison and Chin presented their evidence. The story seemed airtight. A janitor with access, suspicious timing, and a convenient motive. Mr. Ramirez, Detective Martinez said, approaching Miguel as he cleaned the lobby windows, "We need you to come with us." Miguel set down his cleaning supplies with careful deliberation. His eyes, usually downcast in the presence of the firm's employees, met the detective's gaze. He didn't flinch. He didn't show fear. "Of course, Detective," he replied, his voice carrying a hint of something. Not fear, not anger, but an almost imperceptible note of anticipation. As the police led Miguel away, Harrison and Chin exchanged satisfied glances. It was a perfect execution, a perfect performance. The security guards looked on in shock, junior associates whispered among themselves, and the managing partners appeared appropriately concerned about this breach of trust. What no one noticed was the slight smile that flickered across Miguel's face as he was led to the police car. What no one saw was his hand reaching into his pocket, pressing a small button on what appeared to be a maintenance remote, and certainly, no one realized that in that moment, dozens of hidden cameras throughout the firm's offices began uploading their footage to a secure server. Detective Sandra Martinez ushered Miguel into the back seat of the police car, a standard procedure for anyone brought in for questioning. As they headed to the station, Miguel's gaze drifted out the window, taking in the city skyline's twinkling lights. In his mind, a complex tapestry was unfolding. Threads of data, carefully woven from observations, whispered conversations, and the subtle patterns of human behavior. This was his domain, the shadows, where the powerful and privileged thought themselves safe from scrutiny. His eyes snapped back to the present as Detective Martinez turned to him, her voice firm but polite. "Mr. Ramirez, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer truthfully. Can you do that for me?" Miguel nodded, a gesture practiced over 2 decades of playing this game. As they arrived at the station, Martinez led him to a small interrogation room. The air conditioning hummed, casting a sterile glow on the pale walls. A single chair sat opposite the desk, a small camera mounted in the corner. Miguel took his seat, hands resting in his lap. A practiced calm spread over him like a shroud. The detective began, her voice measured and detached. "Mr. Ramirez, can you explain why you were in the document room last night?" Miguel shrugged, a calculated movement. "I clean the offices. Sometimes I go in to wipe down surfaces or restock. That room's always a bit messy." Martinez's eyes narrowed. "What about the security footage showing you enter at 11:47 p.m.? The timestamp's suspiciously close to the time the documents went missing." He leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving the detective's face. "That's because the system was just updated last week. The cameras must have had a minor glitch. It doesn't change who I am or what I do." A pause. The detective leaned forward, her voice dropping to a low, even tone. "Miguel, we've spoken to your supervisor, and he mentioned you've been acting strange lately. Is there something you want to tell me?" Miguel's gaze turned inward, a flicker of something, not fear, nor anticipation, but a quiet determination. He leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just doing my job, detective. I don't know what you're insinuating, but I'm not involved in anything. I don't know what happened to those documents." Detective Martinez's face remained impassive, but a thread of curiosity had crept into her eyes. She pulled out a small notebook and scribbled some notation. "I see. Well, Mr. Ramirez, we'll need to verify some of these claims. For now, let's just say we'll need to speak with your supervisor again. You're free to go, but please don't leave the city." Miguel nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. He was a ghost, and ghosts didn't leave trails. As he stood to leave, a faint hum from the small console on the interrogation table caught his attention. The display flickered to life, showing a single line of blue text on a black background. "Data upload complete." It took a split second for Miguel to process the message. His gaze snapped back to the detective, whose eyes seemed to hold a glimmer of something. Interest, perhaps? He pushed the thought aside. This was far from over. Miguel exited the station, disappearing into the city's evening rush, while the detective leaned back in her chair, the small notebook open in her lap. For the first time in years, a hint of curiosity flickered within her. Who was this man? And what did he truly know? As Miguel vanished into the labyrinthine streets of the city, Detective Martinez remained in the interrogation room, her mind racing. The data upload complete message was a crucial piece of the puzzle. She couldn't explain it, didn't know what it meant. She needed to know more about Miguel. He wasn't the simple janitor everyone believed. She picked up the phone, dialing a number she hadn't used in years. "Agent Porter, it's Martinez. I'm requesting your immediate assistance. We have a situation." Days bled into a whirlwind of legal procedures and media frenzy. Marshall and Reed's PR team worked overtime, crafting headlines, Asterisk trusted employee betrays law firm's confidence. Asterisk the story dominated the news cycle, but something about it nagged at Martinez. The evidence was asterisk too asterisk perfect. Real crimes were messy, complicated. This felt staged, like a play where everyone knew their lines too well. Meanwhile, Miguel sat in his holding cell, maintaining a stoic silence despite relentless questioning. His court-appointed lawyer, David Porter, a young associate from a public defender's office, seemed overwhelmed by the resources Marshall and Reed were throwing at the case. The prosecution had mountains of evidence. The security footage, witness statements from interns who claimed to see Miguel acting suspiciously, even a confession from another maintenance worker who conveniently received a substantial bonus from the firm. But through it all, Miguel remained calm. His eyes tracked every movement in the courtroom during preliminary hearings. He observed every whispered conversation between the prosecutors, taking notes in a small notebook, his handwriting neat and precise. Far too neat for someone with his supposed background. The stage was set for what everyone assumed would be a quick trial and conviction. Marshall and Reed's reputation would be salvaged. The missing files would be written off as corporate espionage, and Miguel Ramirez would become just another cautionary tale about trusting the wrong people. But as Miguel watched Harrison and Chin celebrate their apparent victory with expensive champagne in their offices that evening, he finally allowed himself a real smile. They had no idea that their perfect frame job was about to become their perfect downfall. The trap wasn't set for him. He had set it for them, and they had walked right into it. The day of the trial arrived, bringing with it a palpable tension. The marble halls of the New York County Courthouse echoed with whispers. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. James Harrison and Sarah Chin strode confidently through security, their designer shoes clicking in a perfect rhythm. Behind them, a procession of junior associates struggled with boxes of evidence, each labeled and organized with military precision. In Courtroom 2B, Miguel sat quietly at the defense table, his orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to his calm demeanor. His court-appointed attorney, David Porter, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Porter's wrinkled suit and scuffed briefcase spoke volumes about the resources at his disposal, or, rather, the lack thereof. Every detail of the scene had been carefully orchestrated by Harrison and Chin, down to ensuring Miguel got the most overwhelmed public defender they could find. All rise. The bailiff called out as Judge Eleanor Matthews, known for her sharp mind and even sharper tongue, entered the courtroom. Judge Matthews surveyed the room with steel-gray eyes that had seen every trick in the book during her 30 years on the bench. Harrison rose to deliver his opening statement, adjusting his $10,000 suit with practiced precision. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice carrying the weight of assumed authority. "What we have before us today is not just a simple case of theft. This is a calculated act of corporate espionage that threatens the very foundation of attorney-client privilege." From the gallery, Detective Martinez watched Miguel's reaction. Instead of the nervous fidgeting she usually saw from defendants, Miguel appeared to be studying Harrison with an almost clinical interest, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. His handwriting, she noticed, was precise and methodical, not what she'd expect from someone who spent his life pushing a mop. Sarah Chin took the lead on presenting the evidence, her red heels drawing attention with each deliberate step. "The prosecution calls Amanda Brooks to the stand," she announced, as a young associate in a carefully chosen conservative suit approached the witness box. "Miss Brooks," Chin began, "please tell the court about your observations of the defendant in the weeks leading up to the theft." Brooks cleared her throat, her rehearsed testimony flowing smoothly. "I noticed Mr. Ramirez lingering around the partner's offices during sensitive phone calls. He would tend to clean the same spot for minutes at a time, clearly eavesdropping on confidential conversations." Porter's cross-examination was painful to watch. "But, isn't it his job to clean those areas thoroughly?" he stammered, his question met with condescending smiles from the prosecution team. "Redirect, Your Honor," Chin jumped in smoothly. "Miss Brooks, did you ever observe the defendant cleaning other areas with similar thoroughness?" "Never," Brooks replied firmly. "It was only the partner's offices, and only during important calls about the Bennett case." The prosecution's case continued to unfold like a well-oiled machine. They presented surveillance footage showing Miguel entering the document room late at night, conveniently edited to remove any context. Financial records appeared showing mysterious deposits into an account allegedly belonging to Miguel. all fabricated with expert precision. During the lunch recess, Harrison cornered Porter in the courthouse cafeteria. "David," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "you're fighting a losing battle here. Why put your client through this? A guilty plea would be better for everyone involved." The threat beneath his words was clear as crystal. Porter returned to the defense table looking even more defeated. "Mr. Ramirez," he whispered, "maybe we should consider their offer." Miguel simply shook his head, his eyes fixed on the prosecution's next witness, Joe Martinez, another maintenance worker from the firm. As Martinez took the stand, Miguel's pen moved across his notebook with increased intensity. "Mr. Martinez," Chin began, "please tell the court about your conversation with the defendant on the night of March 15th. Martinez, sporting a suspiciously expensive watch for a maintenance worker, launched into his testimony. "Miguel came to me that night, bragging about how he was going to make more money than he'd ever seen. Said some lawyers from the other side were willing to pay big for inside information." From her seat in the gallery, Detective Martinez noticed something odd. While Porter fumbled through another weak cross-examination, Miguel appeared to be sketching something in his notebook. His hand moved with the confident strokes of someone used to making executive decisions, not someone who pushed a cleaning cart for a living. The afternoon brought more damning evidence. Harrison presented emails allegedly showing communication between Miguel and representatives from the opposing firm. The metadata had been expertly manipulated, creating a perfect paper trail of betrayal. "Your Honor," Harrison declared, "we have here irrefutable proof of conspiracy." He gestured to a series of charts showing phone records, bank transfers, and building access logs, all fabricated with painstaking attention to detail. Judge Matthews studied the evidence with a practiced eye. "Mr. Porter, do you have any objections to these exhibits?" Porter stood, adjusting his crooked tie. "No, Your Honor," he mumbled, seemingly unaware of the slight smile that crossed Miguel's face at his response. As the day drew to a close, Chin prepared their final witness, a technical expert ready to testify about the surveillance system. But as she organized her notes, she caught Miguel watching her with an unsettling intensity. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Chin felt a chill run down her spine. There was something in his gaze that didn't belong there, a calculating intelligence that made her question for the first time whether they had underestimated their target. The bailiff approached to escort Miguel back to his cell. As he stood, he straightened his jumpsuit with the same precise movement Harrison used to adjust his designer suit. The parallel wasn't lost on Detective Martinez, who had spent the day watching the proceedings with growing suspicion. "Court is adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow," Judge Matthews announced, her gavel echoing through the now quiet courtroom. As the prosecution team gathered their materials, celebrating what they saw as an inevitable victory, none of them noticed Miguel's final note of the day. In his precise handwriting, he had written a single phrase, "Checkmate," in 3 moves. The following morning, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Confidence hung thick in the air, a palpable aura surrounding Harrison and Chin. They believed they were on the cusp of securing their victory. Even the usually unflappable Judge Matthews seemed to radiate a sense of finality. As the bailiff called the court to order, all eyes turned to Miguel. He entered the courtroom, his expression inscrutable, and took his seat. He looked rested. His movements were deliberate, his gaze sharp, his hands resting calmly in his lap, as if he was completely at ease. Chin approached the witness stand, ready to introduce their final piece of evidence. The technical expert, a man whose testimony would supposedly seal Miguel's fate. But just as she began to speak, the door to the courtroom swung open, and a stern-faced Detective Martinez strode into the room. A wave of murmurs rippled through the gallery. "Your Honor, I must respectfully request a brief recess," Martinez announced, her voice clear and steady. "New evidence has come to light, directly relevant to this case." Judge Matthews, her curiosity piqued, granted the request without hesitation. The courtroom emptied as the judge and the attorneys retreated to chambers. In the private conference room, the tension was so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Harrison and Chin paced, their composure finally beginning to crack. "What's going on, Martinez?" Harrison demanded, his voice laced with fury. "This trial is proceeding as planned. You can't just interfere with baseless accusations." Martinez remained unmoved. She turned to Judge Matthews, her eyes meeting the judge's steady gaze. Your Honor, I have uncovered irrefutable evidence that the prosecution's case has been built on a foundation of deliberate deception, Martinez said, her voice unwavering. I have located the source of those manipulated files, and it isn't Mr. Ramirez. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. I would also like to submit as evidence the surveillance footage of the night the documents were supposedly stolen from the document room. I believe it will clearly show Mr. Ramirez never went into that room that night, let alone stealing anything. Harrison sputtered, That's impossible. Our expert has confirmed the authenticity of the evidence. Perhaps their definition of authenticity needs to be re-evaluated, Martinez responded, her tone ice cold. The room fell silent. The only sound the agitated breaths of Harrison and Chin. Martinez turned to Miguel's attorney, Porter. Mr. Porter, may I borrow your client for a moment? Porter nodded, his face ashen. He led Miguel out of the chamber, only to return seconds later, his face pale. Your Honor, Porter stammered, my client, he seems to have vanished. The shock of the revelation hung in the air, as Martinez was left to explain the evidence she had discovered. She revealed that the data upload message from the interrogation room was a coded message, a signal that Miguel had sent to her and her team, providing them with the evidence they needed to expose the frame-up. The files, the emails, the phone records, everything had been cleverly fabricated by someone with intimate knowledge of Marshall and Reed systems. As the trial resumed, the prosecution's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The technical expert's testimony was exposed as a sham. The surveillance footage, once presented as ironclad proof, revealed a carefully orchestrated attempt to plant false evidence. The confession from the other maintenance worker was proven to be a lie, a desperate attempt to escape the net Miguel had cast. The court watched in disbelief as the carefully built house of cards came crashing down. I'm afraid, Mr. Harrison, Judge Matthews said, her voice echoing in the hushed courtroom. I am forced to declare a mistrial and turn the case over to a criminal investigation into the evidence tampering. The courtroom descended into chaos. Harrison and Chin were visibly rattled, their faces contorted with disbelief and fury. Detective Martinez watched the spectacle, a faint smile playing on her lips. As the bailiffs prepared to escort the disgraced attorneys from the courtroom, a single note fell to the floor, near the defense table. It was written on a crisp piece of paper, a perfect replica of the prosecution's letterhead. It read, Checkmate, in one move. The end.